Billionaire heard a baby cry outside his window. His ex stood there smiling through her tears. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mahogany desk in Caspian Drew's home office, where quarterly reports lay scattered like autumn leaves. At 36, he possessed the kind of understated authority that came from building an empire without fanfare. Broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored navy shirt, steel gray eyes that missed nothing, and dark hair that caught the light as he leaned back in his leather chair. His Charleston mansion overlooked the harbor where his shipping vessels moved like silent giants against the horizon. The house felt too large these days. Clear's throat, each room echoing with memories he'd tried to bury beneath spreadsheets and international calls. Caspian rubbed his temples, trying to focus on the numbers before him. 14 months. That's how long it had been since he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, letting Tula Crane walk away without fighting for what they had. The thought of her still made his chest tighten. Tallulah, with her warm amber eyes and honey blonde hair that always seemed to escape whatever style she'd attempted that morning. The way she'd challenge him in board meetings, her chin lifted with quiet determination, never backing down. Even when every other executive in the room deferred to his authority, she'd been fearless, beautiful, real. And he'd let the complications of mixing business with pleasure destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. His phone buzzed with another international call, Singapore wanting to discuss container logistics. But Caspian found himself staring past his computer screen toward the window. Somewhere out there, Tallulah was living a life that no longer included him. She'd transferred to their Denver facility 8 months ago. A professional decision that felt personal in every way that mattered. He'd heard through company channels that she was excelling in her new position, managing operations with the same fierce competence that had first caught his attention. But that was all he knew, all he allowed himself to know. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could track cargo ships across 3 oceans, but he had no idea what the woman he'd once loved was doing with her days. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Mr. Drew, his housekeeper, Mrs. Petton, appeared in the doorway. Will you be dining in tonight, or should I prepare something light for your office? Just coffee, thanks. He gestured toward the reports. Long night ahead. Mrs. Petton's weathered face creased with concern. Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you've been working late every night this week. Perhaps a change of scenery would do you good. Caspian almost smiled. His housekeeper had been with him for 5 years, long enough to witness his relationship with Tallulah bloom and wither. She'd never said anything directly, but her worried glances spoke volumes. I'm fine, Mrs. Petton, really. She nodded, unconvinced, and disappeared down the hallway. Caspian returned to his reports, but concentration proved elusive. His mind kept drifting to that last night with Tula, the way her voice had trembled when she had said those final words. If we can only be real away from everything, then maybe we're not real at all. He'd been too proud, too stubborn, too afraid of what it would mean for both their careers if their relationship became public knowledge. The company had strict policies about workplace relationships, especially between executives and their subordinates. But those policies felt insignificant now, compared to the hollow ache that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 6 times, its deep notes reverberating through the silence. Outside, the harbor lights were beginning to twinkle, and somewhere in the distance, a ship's horn sounded, a lonely call that seemed to match his mood perfectly. Caspian pushed back from his desk and moved to the window. The view that once inspired him now felt like a reminder of everything he'd gained and everything he'd lost. Success, it turned out, was a cold companion when you had no one to share it with. His reflection stared back from the glass. A man who had everything except the one thing that mattered most. And as nights settled over Charleston like a familiar blanket, Caspian Drew found himself wondering if some mistakes were too big to fix, some bridges too thoroughly burned to ever cross again. What he didn't know was that 3,000 miles away, a woman with amber eyes and a 6-month-old baby was finally gathering the courage to show him just how wrong he was. 3 hours and 2 failed attempts at concentration later, Caspian abandoned his reports entirely. The numbers blurred together like watercolors in rain, and every financial projection seemed to mock his inability to focus on anything but memories he'd spent over a year trying to suppress. He loosened his tie and made his way to the kitchen, where Mrs. Petton had left a covered plate and a thermos of coffee on the marble counter. The woman was a saint, even if her maternal hovering sometimes felt suffocating. She'd raised 3 children of her own, and seemed determined to ensure her employer didn't waste away from neglect. The house felt different at night, less like a showcase of success and more like what it truly was. An empty shell where his footsteps echoed off hardwood floors and vaulted ceilings. He'd bought it with Tula in mind, imagining lazy Sunday mornings in the sunroom and dinner parties where her laughter would fill the formal dining room. Instead, he ate alone most nights and worked until exhaustion forced him into dreamless sleep. Caspian poured himself coffee and stepped onto the back terrace, where raw iron furniture arranged around a fire pit told the story of gatherings that never happened. The harbor stretched before him, dotted with lights from anchored vessels and the distant glow of the port where his empire had begun, where he'd first seen Tula Crane arguing with the dock supervisor about damaged cargo. She'd been 27 then, newly promoted to operations coordinator, wearing a yellow hard hat that somehow made her look both professional and impossibly young. Her voice had carried across the noise of loading equipment and shouting workers, clear, authoritative, and completely unintimidated by the supervisor who towered over her. "The insurance won't cover negligence, and this isn't weather damage," she'd said, gesturing toward a container with obvious forklift scratches. "Your crew needs retraining, or we need a new contractor." Caspian had been impressed before he'd even seen her face. When she turned and caught him watching, those amber eyes had locked onto his, with zero deference, no recognition of who he was or why he might be important. "Can I help you?" she'd asked, tilting her head slightly. "Just observing," he'd replied. "Carry on." She'd studied him for another moment, then turned back to the supervisor, with the kind of focus that suggested random observers were far less interesting than properly handled cargo. It had taken him 3 more visits to the docks before he'd worked up the courage to introduce himself properly. By then, she'd already impressed half his management team with her efficiency, and the other half with her complete refusal to be intimidated by anyone. The memory made him smile despite himself. Tallulah had never been easily impressed by wealth or status. She'd grown up in a small town in North Carolina, the daughter of a high school principal and a nurse. Everything she'd achieved had come through sheer determination and in work ethic that put most of his executives to shame. That authenticity had been like oxygen to him, rare and essential in a world full of people who said exactly what they thought he wanted to hear. Caspian's phone buzzed against the glass table, startling him from his reverie. A text from his assistant. "Tokyo meeting moved to 6 a.m. your time, sending updated agenda." He glanced at his watch. Nearly 10 o'clock. Which meant 4 hours of sleep if he was lucky. The rational part of his mind knew he should head upstairs, shower, and try to rest before another grueling day of international negotiations. But rationality had been in short supply lately. Instead, he found himself walking through the house toward his study, where a locked drawer contained the one thing he'd kept from their relationship, a photo from the company Christmas party 2 years ago. In it, Tula wore a deep green dress that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, her head thrown back in laughter at something he'd whispered in her ear. They'd been so careful that night to maintain professional distance in public, but the camera had caught them in an unguarded moment. Her hand rested on his forearm, and his expression was soft in a way his business associates would never recognize. It was the only picture he had of them together. Caspian ran his thumb over the frame, remembering how she'd felt in his arms when they danced later that night in his empty office. The Christmas lights from the harbor twinkling through the windows while soft music played from his phone. "This is dangerous," she'd whispered against his shoulder. "I know," he'd replied, but he'd kept dancing anyway. A few months later, she was gone. A sound from the front of the house, gravel crunching in the circular drive, interrupted his brooding. Caspian frowned, checking his watch again. Mrs. Patone was long gone, and he wasn't expecting anyone. Then he heard it, a sound so unexpected, so impossible, that his brain refused to process it immediately. The unmistakable cry of a baby. Caspian's hand froze on the photograph as the baby's cry pierced the night air again, more insistent this time. His heart hammered against his ribs as he set the frame down with trembling fingers and moved toward the front windows. The security lights had activated, flooding the circular drive in white light. Through the sheer curtains, he could make out the silhouette of a figure standing just beyond the row iron gates, someone holding what was unmistakably a small child. His breath caught as recognition slammed into him like a physical blow. Even from this distance, even after 14 months, He knew that posture, the way she shifted her weight slightly to her left hip when she was nervous, the graceful line of her neck as she looked down at the bundle in her arms. Tallulah Caspian's vision blurred for a moment. As every rational thought scattered, she was here at his house with a baby. His legs felt unsteady as he moved toward the front door, muscle memory guiding him through the motions of disabling the alarm and unlocking the heavy oak panels. The night air hit his face as he stepped onto the front porch, cool and salt-tinged from the nearby harbor. The motion sensors caught his movement and additional lights flickered on along the pathway. Tallulah looked up and across the 30 feet that separated them. Their eyes met. She looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. Her honey blonde hair was longer now, pulled back in a messy bun with wisps framing her face. She wore dark jeans and a soft cream sweater that had seen better days. And there were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and exhaustion. But those amber eyes, God, those eyes, still made his chest tighten with longing. The baby in her arms had quieted, small fists waving in the air as if reaching for the lights above. From here, Caspian could see dark hair and what looked like chubby cheeks, but little else. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. The weight of 14 months hung between them like a physical barrier, along with all the words they'd never said and all the hurt they'd never healed. Finally, Tula took a step forward. Then another. Caspian found himself walking down the stone pathway to meet her, his bare feet silent on the cool flagstones. With each step, more details became clear. The slight tremor in her hands, the way she held the baby protectively against her chest, the familiar stubborn tilt of her chin that meant she'd made up her mind about something and wouldn't be swayed. They stopped 3 feet apart, close enough that he could smell her perfume, that light floral scent he'd bought her for her birthday. The one she'd claimed was too expensive, but had worn every day afterward. Caspian, her voice was softer than he remembered, roughened by emotion and fatigue. Tallulah. His own voice sounded foreign to his ears. How did you? She shifted the baby slightly, and he got his first clear look at the child's face. The infant couldn't be more than 6 or 7 months old, with thick dark hair and skin that already showed promise of tawning easily. But it was the eyes that stopped Caspian's heart mid-beat. Steel gray eyes, exactly like his own. The world tilted sideways as understanding crashed over him in waves. 6 months old, 14 months since their breakup. The timeline aligned with devastating precision. Is he? The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. His name is Oliver, Tula said quietly, her gaze never leaving his face. All Drew Crane. Drew. She'd given the baby his middle name. Caspian's knees nearly buckled as he stared at the tiny face that was unmistakably a miniature version of his own. The strong jawline, the serious expression. Even the way the baby's brow furrowed slightly as he studied this stranger with grave intensity. He's mine. It wasn't a question this time. Tallulah's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. I tried to tell you, Caspian, for months. I tried. I sent emails, text messages, left voicemails. I even called your office, but your assistant said you were traveling in Asia indefinitely. The words hit him like physical blows. He remembered the trip, a 2-month negotiation tour through Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo that had been equal parts business necessity and escape from memories of her. He'd left his phone on airplane mode for days at a time, ignoring everything that wasn't directly related to expanding his shipping routes. I didn't know. His voice cracked on the admission. I know. She adjusted Oliver again, the movement automatic and practiced. But I couldn't wait anymore. He deserves to know his father, and you deserve to know your son. The word reverberated through his chest like a bell tolling. He had a son. This perfect, tiny human being with Tula's delicate features and his own unmistakable eyes was his child. Caspian reached out instinctively, then stopped, his hand hovering in the air between them. Can I? Tula nodded, stepping closer. He's usually fussy with strangers, but maybe, as if he understood the gravity of the moment, Oliver turned his head toward Caspian with curious gray eyes. For a long moment, father and son studied each other in the glow of the security lights while the woman who connected them watched with held breath. Then Oliver smiled, a gummy, innocent expression of pure joy, and Caspian's carefully constructed walls crumbled into dust. The smile hit Caspian like a freight train carrying 14 months of regret. His vision blurred as Oliver gurgled happily, tiny fingers reaching toward the stranger who shared his eyes. Without thinking, Caspian extended his hand. and those impossibly small fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. The touch was electric. This was his child, his son. The reality crashed through him in waves that left him struggling to breathe. "He's beautiful," Caspian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He's absolutely perfect." Tula's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks as she watched father and son meet for the first time. "He has your stubborn streak already, and your appetite. He eats constantly." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in Caspian's chest, surprising them both. "Poor kid doesn't stand a chance with our combined stubbornness." The word "our" hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Oliver seemed oblivious to the tension, content to grip his father's thumb while studying the man's face with serious gray eyes. "Tula," Caspian started, then stopped. What could he possibly say that would make up for 6 months of not knowing his son existed? "I'm so sorry. If I had known." "I know," she said softly. "I believe you. But Caspian, this isn't just about you missing calls or being unreachable. We have bigger things to figure out." The practical reality of the situation began to settle around him like morning fog. This wasn't just about acknowledging paternity or making up for lost time. This was about a child who needed stability, care, and 2 parents who had to find a way forward despite their complicated past. How are you managing financially? I mean, the businessman in him kicked in, already calculating child support, trust funds, college accounts, whatever you need. "I'm fine." Her chin lifted with familiar pride. "I got promoted to regional operations manager in Denver. I have good insurance, daycare, a small apartment near the mountains. We're doing okay." Of course, Tula had never needed anyone to rescue her, least of all him. It was one of the things that had drawn him to her originally, her fierce independence and refusal to be impressed by his wealth. But it was also what made this moment so much more complicated. "Denver," he repeated, the distance between them suddenly feeling insurmountable. "You live in Denver." "I do. We do." She glanced down at Oliver, who was now trying to bring Caspian's thumb to his mouth. "But I couldn't keep him from knowing you. That wouldn't be fair to either of you." The weight of that sacrifice wasn't lost on him. She'd traveled nearly 2,000 meters with a 6-month-old baby to give him something he hadn't even known he'd lost. "Come inside," Caspian said suddenly. "Please, we can't have this conversation standing in my driveway." Tula hesitated, and he could see her weighing the implications of entering his home again. The last time she'd been here, they'd been planning their future together. Now, they were strangers trying to navigate an impossible situation. "Just to talk," he added quickly. "You must be exhausted. When did you get into town?" "This afternoon. I've been sitting in a coffee shop for 3 hours trying to work up the courage to come here." She adjusted Oliver Uncas' position as he began to fuss slightly. "He's hungry. I should probably feed him soon." The casual mention of feeding the baby sent another wave of surreal disbelief through Caspian. 6 months of bottles and middle-of-the-night feedings, first words, and tiny milestones. All of it had happened without him. "Of course, yes. Whatever you need." He stepped back, gesturing toward the front door. "I think Mrs. Petton left some tea in the kitchen, and there's a sitting room that's comfortable." Tula followed him up the pathway, her footsteps soft on the stone. As they reached the front porch, Oliver let out a small cry of hunger, and Caspian felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "Is he okay? Does he need anything?" The questions tumbled out before he could stop them. "He's fine, just ready for dinner." She smiled, and for a moment, it was almost like before, easy and natural. "He's usually pretty good-natured, unless he's hungry or tired. Then, he turns into a tiny dictator." They entered the foyer and Caspian watched Tula take in the changes since she'd last been here. The formal portrait he'd commissioned was gone, replaced by a simple landscape. The fresh flowers Mrs. Petton usually arranged had been replaced with something more understated. Everything was exactly as impressive and twice as empty as she probably remembered. "Nothing's changed," she said quietly. But there was no judgment in her voice, just observation. "No," he admitted. "I suppose it hasn't." Oliver Unc's fussing escalated to a proper cry, and Tula immediately shifted into mother mode. "Is that sitting room still down the hall? I need to feed him. And I'd rather not do it standing up." "Yes, of course. You need anything? Water, a blanket?" She paused in the hallway, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Caspian, you don't have to take care of us. That's not why I came." "Then why did you come?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Tula's eyes met his, and in them he saw exhaustion, determination, and something that might have been hope, because he deserves better than growing up thinking his father didn't want him. And because you deserve the chance to prove that wrong. The sitting room felt different with Tula in it. Caspian had spent countless evenings here alone, reading financial reports, or staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the harbor. Now watching her settle into the cream leather armchair with practiced efficiency, the space suddenly felt alive again. Oliver Uncas' cries had escalated to the kind of urgent wailing that demanded immediate attention. Tallulah reached into a well-worn diaper bag that had seen better days, pulling out a bottle and testing the temperature against her wrist with movements so natural they spoke of months of routine. "Here, sweetheart," she murmured to Oliver, offering him the bottle. The crying stopped instantly, replaced by the soft sounds of contented feeding. Caspian found himself frozen in the doorway, uncertain whether to sit or leave them in peace. There was something so intimate about watching her feed their son, a routine he'd never been part of, a bond that had formed without him. "You can sit down," Tula said, without looking up, a hint of amusement in her voice. "He's not going to break." "I know. I just." Caspian moved to the sofa across from her, keeping what felt like a respectful distance. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding. He's your son." She looked up then, and her expression was gentle but firm. "This is as much your reality as it is mine now." Oliver Uncas' gray eyes tracked between his parents as he drank, occasionally pausing to study Caspian with the kind of serious concentration that was eerily familiar. It was the same expression Caspian wore when analyzing complex shipping contracts. "Does he always stare like that?" Caspian asked, "like he's trying to figure out if you're worth his time." Tula's mouth quirked upward. "That's definitely your influence. He's been doing it since he was born. The nurses said they'd never seen such a serious newborn." The casual mention of Oliver's birth hit Caspian with fresh guilt. "I should have been there for the delivery, for everything after. I should have." "Caspian, stop." Tula's voice was kind but firm. "We can't change what happened. We can only decide what happens next." Oliver finished his bottle and immediately began the squirmy movements that Tallulah apparently recognized as a signal. She lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back with gentle precision, until he released a tiny burp that seemed far too loud for such a small person. Caspian couldn't help but smile. "Impressive lung capacity. He gets that from you too. I think you should hear him at 2 o'clock in the morning." She shifted Oliver so he was sitting upright in her lap, facing his father. "Say hello to Daddy Ali." The word daddy sent a shock through Caspian's system. He was someone's father. This perfect little person was half him, carried the Drew name, had inherited his eyes, and apparently his stubborn streak. Oliver babbled something that might have been a greeting, one chubby hand reaching toward the coffee table, where a crystal paperweight caught the lamplight. "He likes shiny things," Tula explained, "and anything he's not supposed to touch." "Smart kid." Caspian leaned forward slightly, drawn by an instinct he didn't fully understand. "How do you do it every day?" "I mean, the feeding and the crying, and the same way you built a shipping empire, I imagine, one crisis at a time." She bounced Oliver gently as he began to get restless. "Some days are harder than others, but he's worth it." Caspian studied them together, the easy way she anticipated Oliver Uncas' needs, the protective curve of her arm around him, the soft expression that transformed her face when she looked at their son. She'd become a mother in his absence, learned a completely new language of care and devotion. "I want to help," he said suddenly. "I know I missed the beginning, but I want to be part of his life, part of whatever this is." Tula was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently stroking Oliver Uncas' dark hair. "What does that look like to you? You're here, I'm in Denver. You travel constantly for work, and I have a job I can't just abandon." The logistics were overwhelming when stated so plainly. Custody arrangements, visitation schedules, the practical reality of co-parenting across 2,000 meters. But looking at Oliver's serious little face, Caspian knew he'd figure it out somehow. "I don't know yet, but I'll make it work. Whatever it takes, even if it means changing how you live, how you work." There was challenge in her voice now, the same tone she'd used when questioning inefficient doc procedures. "Because this isn't something you can manage from a distance, Caspian. Children need consistency, presence. They need parents who show up." The criticism stung because it was fair. His entire adult life had been built around mobility, around being wherever the next deal required him to be. But sitting here, watching Oliver reach for his mother's face with tiny fingers, Caspian realized that some things were worth changing everything for. "Then I'll learn to show up," he said quietly. "I'll figure out how to be the father he deserves." Oliver chose that moment to let out another happy babble, as if approving of this conversation. Then, to Caspian's amazement, the baby held out both arms toward him, the universal infant request to be picked up. Tula looked surprised. He doesn't usually warm up to people this quickly. Caspian's hands were already moving, guided by an instinct stronger than fear. Support his head, Tula instructed softly, helping transfer Oliver to his father's arms. The baby felt impossibly light and solid at the same time, warm weight settling against Caspian's chest like he belonged there. Oliver looked up at him with those serious gray eyes, and Caspian felt something fundamental shift in his chest. A fierce protectiveness that made every priority he'd ever had suddenly seemed negotiable. "Hello, son," he whispered, and Oliver smiled, that gummy, heart-topping smile again. Across the room, Tula watched them with tears streaming down her face. And Caspian realized that some bridges weren't burned after all. They were just waiting for the right reason to rebuild them. Oliver had fallen asleep in Caspian's arms, his tiny fist curled against his father's chest while soft snuffles escaped his rosebud lips. For 20 minutes, neither parent had moved, both afraid of disturbing the peace that had settled over the room like a benediction. Caspian marveled at the weight of his son, so small, yet somehow the most important thing he'd ever held. Every breath Oliver took seemed to synchronize with his own heartbeat, creating a rhythm he'd never known he'd been missing. "He likes you," Tula said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "It took him weeks to fall asleep in my mother's arms when we visited last month. Your mother knows about him." The question came out sharper than Caspian intended. Talila's expression shifted slightly. "Of course she does. She flew out when he was born, stayed for 2 weeks to help. She's been sending care packages every month since." Another milestone he'd missed, another support system that had formed in his absence. The weight of everything he hadn't been part of pressed against his chest like a physical ache. "What did you tell her about me?" He kept his voice low, mindful of the sleeping baby. "The truth that we'd broken up and I couldn't reach you when I found out I was pregnant." Tula tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so familiar it made his chest tight. "She wanted to track you down herself, but I asked her not to. I needed to handle it my way." "Your mother must hate me." "She doesn't hate you. She's disappointed, but she doesn't hate you." Tula studied his face carefully. "She raised me to believe that good people sometimes make mistakes. The measure of character is what they do when they get a second chance." The weight of that expectation settled around Caspian's shoulders. This wasn't just about proving himself to Tula, or even to Oliver. There was a whole extended family. People who'd been part of his son's life while he'd been absent, who would judge him based on his actions moving forward. Oliver stirred slightly in his sleep, one tiny hand reaching out before settling back against Caspian's shirt. The simple gesture made something fierce and protective surge through him. "I want to meet her," he said quietly. "Your mother and anyone else who's been part of his life. I want to know the people who were there when I wasn't." Tula's eyes softened. "She'd like that. She's been wondering about you, asking questions I couldn't answer." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you're the kind of man who'd step up, whether you'd put Oliver first, even when it's inconvenient." She paused, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Whether you'd learned anything from losing us the first time." The questions cut deep because they were fair. Caspian had spent 14 months proving he could live without them. Building higher walls and longer hours until the loneliness became background noise. But holding Oliver now, feeling the solid reality of his son in his arms, he realized what a hollow victory that had been. "I learned that success doesn't mean anything if you don't have someone to share it with," he said finally. "I learned that pride is expensive, and some prices aren't worth paying." "And what about your work, your empire?" There was no mockery in her voice, just genuine curiosity. "You've built something incredible, Caspian. I know how much it means to you." He looked down at Oliver's peaceful face, then back at Tula. "I built it for the wrong reasons. To prove something, to have control over something when everything else felt chaotic. But what's the point of an empire if it's empty?" Oliver chose that moment to wake up, blinking those serious gray eyes and immediately focusing on his father's face. A slow smile spread across his features, followed by a happy gurgle that made both parents smile. "He's going to need a diaper change soon," Tula said, recognizing signs. Caspian was still learning to read. "I brought supplies." but there's a powder room just down the hall that might work. Or we could use the guest room upstairs if you need more space. Caspian found himself reluctant to give Oliver back, even for something as practical as a diaper change. The guest room might be easier. This one's a wiggle monster when it comes to diaper changes. They made their way upstairs, Caspian still carrying Oliver, while Tula brought the diaper bag. The guest room was spacious and elegant, with a king-sized bed that would provide plenty of room for the task ahead. You can lay him down, Tula instructed, pulling supplies from the bag with practiced efficiency. Just keep a hand on him so he doesn't roll. Caspian had negotiated million-dollar contracts with less nervousness than he felt placing Oliver on the bed. His son immediately proved Tula's warning accurate by attempting to flip onto his stomach the moment he was horizontal. He's strong, Caspian observed, gently restraining Oliver's rolling attempt. Too strong for his own good sometimes. Last week, he managed to push himself backward off my bed. Scared both of us. She handed Caspian a fresh diaper. Want to try? It's not rocket science. Just engineering under pressure. The next 10 minutes were equal parts comedy and terror, as Caspian attempted his first diaper change while Oliver treated the entire process like an amusing game. Tula guided him through the steps, laughing at his intense concentration and Oliver's complete lack of cooperation. There, she said finally, as Caspian successfully fastened the last tape. Not bad for a first attempt. Oliver's even still wearing it, which is more than I can say for my first few tries. Caspian felt an absurd surge of pride at this small accomplishment. I suppose there's hope for me yet. More than you know, Tula said softly, lifting Oliver from the bed. He doesn't usually let strangers handle him like this. You really are his father. As if to prove her point, Oliver reached for Caspian again, making the soft cooing sounds that apparently meant contentment. Caspian took him automatically now, the motion already feeling natural. Tula, he began, then stopped. How did you ask someone to restructure their entire life? How did you rebuild something that had been broken so completely? What is it? Stay. The word came out in a rush. Not forever, not permanently, but stay for a few days. Let me learn how to do this. Let me prove that I can be what he needs. Her expression was unreadable as she considered his request. Outside, the harbor lights twinkled like distant stars, and somewhere in the house, the grandfather clock chimed 11 times. I can stay until Wednesday, she said finally. I have meetings I can't reschedule after that 3 days. It wasn't enough time to make up for 6 months, but it was a beginning. Thank you, he said. And Oliver babbled something that sounded remarkably like agreement. The next morning arrived with the kind of chaos Caspian had never experienced. At 5:47 a.m., Oliver's cries pierced through the mansion's walls like an air raid siren. Jolting Caspian from the first deep sleep he'd had in months, he stumbled from his bedroom in pajama pants and a t-shirt, following the sound to the guest room where Tula had spent the night. Through the slightly open door, he could see her silhouette moving in the pre-dawn darkness, her voice soft and soothing despite the exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I know, sweetheart, I know you're hungry. Mama's getting your bottle ready. Caspian knocked gently on the doorframe. Can I help? Tula turned, her hair escaping from a messy ponytail, and dark circles under her eyes, more pronounced in the pale morning light. She wore an oversized t-shirt that had definitely seen better days and cotton shorts, looking nothing like the polished operations manager, he remembered, and everything like a woman who'd been up multiple times during the night. He's usually good for 4 hours between feedings, but last night was rough. New place, different sounds. She lifted Oliver from the portable crib she'd assembled in the corner, bouncing him gently as his cries continued. I need to heat his bottle, but he doesn't like waiting. Give him to me, Caspian said without thinking. I'll hold him while you get the bottle ready. Tula hesitated for a moment, then handed Oliver over. The baby's cries didn't stop immediately, but they shifted to a different tone, more confused than distressed. Kitchen's downstairs, Caspian told her. I'll walk with him. Sometimes movement helps, right? You don't have to. I want to. He was already moving toward the hallway, Oliver's weight familiar now in his arms. This is what parents do, isn't it? The next 20 minutes were a crash course in infant management. Oliver alternated between curious, babbling and indignant crying as Caspian paced the hallway, narrating everything they passed like a bizarre house tour. That's a painting of a ship your daddy bought in Portugal, overpriced according to your mother. And this is the library where I used to read quarterly reports at midnight because I was too stubborn to admit I was lonely. By the time Tula appeared with a warmed bottle, Oliver had settled into fascinated observation of his father's face. You're a natural, she said, offering him the bottle. It took me weeks to figure out that he likes constant commentary. Caspian settled into one of the living room armchairs, positioning Oliver for feeding with the careful attention he usually reserved for complex negotiations. Does he always wake up this early? This early? Earlier. Sometimes not until 7 o'clock if I'm lucky. Tula curled up on the sofa across from them, pulling a throw blanket around her shoulders. The pediatrician says he's going through a growth spurt. Everything is more frequent. Eating, sleeping, growing out of clothes. Growing out of clothes. He's already in 6 to 9 month sizes. I swear he grows overnight sometimes. She watched Oliver drink with the quiet satisfaction of a mother whose baby was content. I've learned not to buy anything too far in advance. The casual mention of clothing sizes and pediatrician visits reminded Caspian again of how much practical knowledge he lacked. 6 months of milestones, medical appointments, and tiny changes that marked Oliver Unke's development had happened without him. What else am I missing? He asked. What should I know about him? Tula considered this seriously. He loves music. Classical, jazz, even country, doesn't matter. Music calms him down faster than anything else. And he's fascinated by water. Bathtub is his favorite part of the day. What about toys? Books. He's too young for most toys, but he loves textures, soft things, rough things. Anything he can grab and explore. She smiled at some private memory. Last week, he spent 20 minutes completely absorbed by a velvet cushion at my neighbor's house, just running his fingers over it like he was solving the mysteries of the universe. Oliver finished his bottle and immediately began the squirming that apparently meant burping time. Caspian lifted him to his shoulder, patting his back with the gentle rhythm Tallulah had taught him the night before. There's something else, Tallulah said, her voice carefully neutral. Something you should probably know before you make any long-term plans. The tone made Caspian's stomach tighten. What kind of something? I've been seeing someone. The words hung in the air, like a challenge. Nothing serious yet, but he's good with Oliver. Patient, kind. The burp cloth in Caspian's hand might as well have turned to lead. Of course, she was seeing someone. Beautiful, intelligent, single mother. Why wouldn't she be? But the rational understanding did nothing to ease the sharp spike of jealousy that shot through his chest. How long? He managed to ask. A few months. We worked together. He's in logistics coordination. We started as friends and she shrugged, but her eyes were watching his face carefully. I needed to tell you, if you're going to be part of Oliver's life, you need to understand that my life isn't on hold waiting for you to figure things out. Oliver chose that moment to release an impressive burp, followed by a contented sigh that would have been amusing under different circumstances. Caspian continued, patting his son's back automatically, his mind racing through implications he wasn't ready to face. Does Oliver like him? The question came out more strained than he'd intended. He does. David is gentle with him, doesn't try to force anything. He understands that Oliver comes first. Tula's voice softened slightly. I'm not trying to hurt you, Caspian, but you can't expect everything to be frozen in time just because you're ready to be involved now. David, the man, had a name, a job, a relationship with both Tallulah and Oliver. He was real in a way that made Caspian's newfound paternal intentions feel suddenly insufficient. Is it serious? This thing with David? It could be. He's talking about meeting my parents next month. He wants to be part of a family, not just someone I see when Oliver's with a babysitter. The words hit like physical blows. Another man wanting to be part of the family Caspian had walked away from. Another man who understood what Caspian was only beginning to learn, that loving Tula meant loving Oliver to completely and without reservation. I see. He adjusted Oliver Unke's position, needing something to do with his hands. And what do you want? Tula was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with those amber eyes that had always been able to see too much. I want Oliver to have a father who chooses to be present, not one who shows up when it's convenient. I want stability, consistency. Someone who understands that being a parent means reshaping your entire life around another person's needs. She paused, then added more softly, and I want to stop feeling like I'm waiting for someone who may never prioritize us the way we deserve. The truth of it settled around them like morning fog. Oliver had fallen asleep again against Caspian's shoulder, oblivious to the adult complications swirling around his peaceful world. 3 days suddenly felt like both an eternity, and nowhere near enough time to prove he could be the man they both needed him to be. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Caspian went through the motions of learning Oliver's routine. Diaper changes, feeding times, the specific way he liked to be held when he was cranky. But David's existence hung between them like a storm cloud, making every interaction feel weighted with unspoken questions. By noon, Oliver was napping in his portable crib, and the house had fallen into an uncomfortable quiet. Tula sat at the kitchen island with her laptop, catching up on emails while Caspian pretended to review shipping manifests on his tablet. "You're not actually reading those," she said without looking up from her screen. "How do you know?" "Because you've been staring at the same page for 20 minutes, and your jaws clenched tight enough to crack molars." She closed her laptop and turned to face him. "We should talk about this." "About what?" "Your boyfriend who wants to play daddy to my son." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, laced with a jealousy that surprised him with its intensity. Tula's eyes flashed. "David isn't trying to play anything. He's a good man who cares about both of us, something that was in short supply when I needed it most." The accusation hit its mark. Caspian sat down his tablet and rubbed his face with both hands. "You're right. I know you're right. You just what? Expected everything to stay the same while you figured out your priorities." She stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the harbor. "I spent months hoping you'd call, that you'd somehow sense I needed you, but you didn't, and I had to build a life that worked without you. I know, God, Tula, I know I failed you, both of you." He stood as well, the distance between them feeling like a canyon. "But I'm here now. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for a lot, but it doesn't erase the reality of where we are." She turned back to him, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, not just from sleepless nights with Oliver, but from carrying everything alone for so long. "David proposed last week." The words hit him like a physical blow. Caspian gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white against the marble surface. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I needed time, that there were things I had to resolve first." Her voice was steady, but he could see the vulnerability she was trying to hide. "This trip coming here, it wasn't just about telling you about Oliver. It was about figuring out if there was still something worth fighting for." The honesty in her voice made his chest tight. "And what have you decided?" Before she could answer, Oliver Unk's cry pierced the air from upstairs. Tula moved automatically toward the sound, but Caspian caught her arm gently. "Let me," he said. "Please." She hesitated, then nodded. "He's probably just disoriented. New place, different nap spot." Caspian took the stairs 2 at a time, following Oliver Unk's increasingly distressed cries. He found his son red-faced and furious in the portable crib, tiny fists waving at the injustice of waking up alone in an unfamiliar room. "Hey there, little man," Caspian said softly, lifting Oliver into his arms. I know. Everything's different and confusing." Oliver's cries diminished to hiccupi sniffles as he recognized his father's voice. Caspian walked to the window, bouncing gently as he'd seen Tula do. "You want to know a secret?" he whispered to his son. "Daddy's scared, too. Scared he waited too long. Scared he doesn't know how to fix the things he broke." Oliver blinked up at him with those serious gray eyes, one tiny hand reaching up to pat Caspian's cheek with surprising gentleness. "Your mama found someone who knows how to take care of both of you. Someone who was there when I wasn't." The words tasted bitter, but they needed to be said. "Maybe that's what you deserve. Someone who didn't have to learn how important you are." But even as he said it, holding Oliver close and feeling the solid warmth of his son against his chest, Caspian knew he couldn't give up, not without a fight, not when he'd finally found what had been missing from his carefully constructed life. "No," he said more firmly, looking into Oliver Unk's eyes. "No, that's not how this story ends. Daddy made mistakes, big ones, but he's going to fix them somehow." Oliver gurgled something that might have been agreement, or might have been hunger, or might have been the random sounds 6-month-old babies made when they were content. But to Caspian, it sounded like encouragement. When they returned to the kitchen, Tula was standing by the sink, staring out at the harbor with an expression he couldn't read. "He okay?" she asked without turning around. Just needed some reassurance that he wasn't alone. Caspian settled into one of the bar stools, keeping Oliver in his lap. "Something I'm still learning how to provide." She turned then, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. "You're not the same person who let me walk away 14 months ago." "No, I'm not. That man was an idiot who thought success meant never needing anyone." He looked down at Oliver, who was contentedly chewing on his own fist. "This man knows that everything he built means nothing if he can't share it with the people who matter most." Pretty words, Caspian. But David doesn't just say the right things. He shows up every day. He doesn't travel for months at a time or disappear into work when things get complicated. Then let me show up too. The words came out in a rush. Cancel my Asia trip. Postpone the merger negotiations. I'll prove that I can put you and Oliver first. But I need more than 3 days to do it. Tula stared at him for a long moment. You'd really do that? Canceled $1 million deals for us. The deals will wait. You won't. Not forever. He stood up, still holding Oliver, and took a step toward her. I lost you once because I was too proud to fight for what mattered. I won't make that mistake again. And if it's too late, if I choose David, the question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and heartbreak in equal measure. Oliver chose that moment to reach for his mother, making the soft coo-cooing sounds that meant he wanted both parents close. Then, I'll respect your decision, Caspian said quietly. But I'll still be Oliver Unk's father. Still be part of his life, and maybe someday you'll remember why we were good together before everything went wrong. Tula took Oliver from his arms, but she didn't step away. For a moment, they stood close enough that he could smell her shampoo, see the gold flecks in her amber eyes. You hurt me, she whispered, more than I knew it was possible to be hurt by someone I loved. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it if you'll let me. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang, echoing through the house like a gunshot. They both froze, the moment shattering around them. I'm not expecting anyone, Caspian said, but Tula had gone pale, her grip tightening on Oliver. I am, she said quietly. I called him this morning. I thought you should meet David. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time, and Caspian felt his world tilt sideways. David was here, the man who wanted to marry Tula, who'd been there through sleepless nights and doctor appointments, who knew Oliver's laugh and favorite lullabies, was standing on his doorstep. You called him here? Caspian's voice was carefully controlled, but Tula knew him well enough to recognize the storm brewing beneath the surface. I thought it was the right thing to do. If we're going to figure this out, everyone should meet. She adjusted Oliver in her arms, using their son as a shield against Caspian's intensity. You said you wanted to know the people who've been part of his life. The doorbell chimed a third time, and Caspian realized there was no avoiding this moment. He straightened his shoulders, calling on the same composure that had carried him through hostile corporate takeovers and international negotiations. Fine, let's meet David. The walk to the front door felt like a march to execution. Through the beveled glass panels, Caspian could make out a tall figure holding what looked like flowers. Of course, David brought flowers, probably the kind Tula actually liked, not the expensive arrangements Caspian used to order from the florist his assistant recommended. He opened the door and found himself face to face with his replacement. David Mitchell was everything Caspian had feared and nothing like what he'd expected. Mid-30s, sandy brown hair, kind blue eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt that looked like it had been chosen for comfort rather than impression. He was handsome in an approachable way, the kind of man who coached Little League and remembered birthdays without calendar reminders. He was perfect for them, and Caspian hated him on sight. You must be Caspian. David's smile was genuine, his handshake firm, but not aggressive. I'm David Mitchell. I've heard a lot about you. All bad, I'm sure. The words came out more bitter than Caspian intended. Actually, no. Tula speaks about you with respect, especially when it comes to your business accomplishments. David looked past him toward the interior of the house. Is she here? I brought sunflowers. Oliver loves the bright colors. Of course, he knew what flowers Oliver liked. Caspian stepped aside, allowing David to enter his home, his sanctuary, the space where he'd been rebuilding something fragile with Tula and their son. We're in the kitchen, Caspian said, leading the way. Tallulah looked up as they entered, and her face brightened in a way that made Caspian's chest constrict. David, you made good time. Traffic was lighter than expected. David moved directly to her, pressing a gentle kiss to her cheek before turning his attention to Oliver. And how's my favorite little man today? Oliver immediately reached for David with the same enthusiasm he'd shown for Caspian, babbling happily as familiar hands lifted him into the air. The easy comfort between them was evident in every gesture. David knowing exactly how Oliver liked to be held, the way he automatically checked the baby's diaper, the soft nonsense words that made Oliver giggle. He missed you, Tula said, her voice warm with affection. I missed him, too. It's only been 2 days, but it feels longer. David settled Oliver against his hip with practiced ease, then turned to Caspian. Tallulah told me about your situation. I can only imagine how overwhelming this must be for you. The kindness in David's voice made everything worse. Caspian had been prepared for hostility, possessiveness, anything that would justify his resentment. Instead, he was faced with genuine understanding from a man who clearly loved both Tula and Oliver without reservation. It's been educational, Caspian managed. I'm sure the learning curve is steep with babies. David bounced Oliver gently as he began to fuss. I remember the first time Tula trusted me to babysit for a few hours. I called her 3 times in 2 hours, convinced I was doing everything wrong. You were doing everything wrong. Tula laughed. You tried to feed him cereal at 4 months and wondered why he spit it all over you. The easy banter between them painted a picture of shared experiences, inside jokes, the kind of domestic intimacy that Caspian had never achieved with anyone. They were a family, and everything but name, and he was the outsider looking in. Would you like some coffee? Caspian offered, grasping for some semblance of host-like control. That would be great. Thank you. David settled into one of the bar stools, Oliver, content in his arms. This is a beautiful home, Tula mentioned. You have an incredible view of the harbor. The sunroom has the best vantage point, Caspian said automatically, then caught himself offering to show David around like some kind of real estate agent. As he prepared coffee with hands that weren't quite steady, Caspian listened to the conversation behind him. David asked about Oliver's sleep schedule, whether he was hitting his developmental milestones, if the pediatrician had any concerns about his rapid growth. All the questions a concerned parent would ask. All the questions Caspian should have been asking for the past 6 months. He's been fascinated by your grandfather clock, Tula was telling David. Every time it chimes, he stops whatever he's doing and stares in that direction. Smart kid, probably wondering where the sound comes from. David's voice was full of genuine fondness. At home, he does the same thing with the microwave timer. At home, David referred to Tula's apartment as home, spoke of Oliver Unk's habits, there with the authority of someone who was present for daily life, not visiting for a long weekend. Caspian set coffee cups down with more force than necessary, causing both Tula and David to look at him with concern. Everything okay? David asked. Fine, just tired. It's been an emotional few days. Caspian took a seat across from them, studying the tableau they made. David's arm rested casually on the back of Tula's chair. Oliver balanced on his knee. Both parents focused on their child with the kind of united attention that spoke of partnership. I can imagine, David said quietly, finding out you're a father, especially under these circumstances. It changes everything, doesn't it? Everything, Caspian agreed, and for the first time, he heard no condescension in David's voice, just understanding. They sat in silence for a moment, Oliver providing a soundtrack of happy babbles as he played with David's watch. Then David cleared his throat. I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me, David, Tallulah warned, but he pressed on. Are you planning to fight for them, for Tallulah and Oliver? David's blue eyes met Caspian's directly. Because if you are, I need to know. I won't compete for someone who doesn't want to be one. The directness of the question caught Caspian off the guard. He'd expected territorial posturing, veiled threats, anything but this straightforward honesty. Yes, he said simply. I am. David nodded slowly as if he'd expected this answer. Then, I guess we have a problem. David, please, Tula began, but he gently cut her off. No, this needs to be said. I love you, Tula. I love Oliver. I want to spend my life taking care of both of you, but I also know that there are some battles a man shouldn't have to fight. He looked between Caspian and Tula with painful clarity. If there's even a chance that your heart is still with him, then I'm already losing. The quiet dignity in David's voice filled the kitchen with uncomfortable truth. Oliver, sensing the tension, began to whimper, reaching for his mother with tiny hands. Tula took Oliver from David's arms, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. This isn't how I wanted this to happen. I know, David said gently, but maybe it's how it needed to happen. Maybe some questions can only be answered when all the players are in the same room. He stood up, leaving his coffee untouched, and moved toward Tula. For a moment, Caspian thought he was going to kiss her goodbye, but instead, David simply touched her face with infinite tenderness. Take the time you need to figure this out, but Tula, don't choose me because I'm safe. Choose me because you can't imagine your life without me. He looked down at Oliver one last time, pressing a gentle kiss to the baby's forehead. Take care of your mom, little man. And then he was gone, leaving Caspian and Tula staring at each other across a kitchen that suddenly felt too quiet, too empty, too full of everything they'd never said. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by Oliver's soft cooing as he played with the collar of Tula's shirt. She hadn't moved since David left, hadn't even looked away from the spot where he'd been standing, as if she could will him back through sheer force of regret. "He's a good man," Caspian said, finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The best Tula's voice was barely above a whisper. "He deserves someone who loves him completely, without reservations, without looking over her shoulder at what used to be, and you can't be that person. I thought I could. For months, I convinced myself that what we had was enough, that stability and kindness, and genuine care, were more important." Than she trailed off, finally looking at him. "Than this. Whatever this is between us." Caspian's heart hammered against his ribs as he recognized something in her eyes he'd thought was lost forever. The same vulnerable intensity that had drawn him to her in the first place. "What is this, Tallulah? Because I need to know. I need to understand if I'm fighting for something real, or just the memory of what we used to have." She shifted Oliver to her other arm, using the movement to buy herself time. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger, more certain. "Do you remember the night before I left? Our last real conversation?" Every word, the memory was carved into his consciousness like a scar. "You said we could only be real away from everything else. And maybe that meant we weren't real at all." I was wrong. The admission came out in a rush. "We were real, Caspian, more real than anything I've felt before or since. But I was so tired of hiding, of pretending we were just colleagues when everyone in that building knew exactly what we meant to each other. The company policies were excuses." She cut him off gently but firmly. "You were scared. We both were, but I was ready to risk everything. And you weren't, so I walked away before you could." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. All this time, he told himself, the separation was about logistics, about protecting their careers and maintaining professional boundaries. But Tula was right. It had been about fear. Fear of being vulnerable, of needing someone more than they needed him, of building something that could be destroyed by forces beyond his control. "I was terrified." He admitted. "Everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for, it all felt so fragile when I imagined losing you. So I convinced myself it was better to let you go than risk having you taken away." And now, Caspian looked at Oliver, who was watching his parents with those serious gray eyes, and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by something stronger. The absolute certainty that some risks were worth taking. "Now I know that losing you wasn't protecting anything. It was destroying everything that actually mattered." He stood up, moving closer to them, but careful not to crowd her space. "I spent 14 months building higher walls, working longer hours, convincing myself I was fine alone. But I wasn't living, Tula. I was just existing. And if I choose you, what happens then? Do we pretend the last year never happened? Do we pick up where we left off like nothing changed?" "Everything changed. You're a mother now. I'm a father. We're not the same people who were too scared to fight for what we had." He reached out tentatively, touching Oliver's tiny hand with one finger. "But maybe we're better people. Maybe we're finally ready for what we were too young and stupid to handle before." Oliver wrapped his fingers around Caspian's with that surprising infant strength, and Tula's breath caught at the sight of her two favorite people connected in such a simple, perfect gesture. "I need to know you won't run again," she said quietly. "I need to know that when things get complicated, and they will get complicated, you won't disappear behind work and travel and all the ways you've learned to avoid dealing with feelings. I'll probably mess up sometimes. I'll probably revert to old patterns when I'm scared or overwhelmed." He met her eyes directly, holding nothing back. "But I won't run. Not from you. Not from Oliver. Not from this family we could build together. I promise you that." "How can you be sure?" "Because losing you the first time nearly destroyed me. Losing Oliver. Losing the chance to be his father every day, to watch him grow up, to be part of his life instead of just a visitor. That would finish the job." His voice cracked slightly on the admission. "You too are my home, Tula. Everything else is just geography." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she processed his words, and Oliver reached up to pat her face with the same gentle touch he'd used on his father earlier. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Good. I'm terrified. That means this matters enough to be worth the fear." For a long moment, they stood there in the kitchen where so many crucial conversations had taken place, the weight of their decisions settling around them like morning mist. Outside, the harbor was coming alive with the sounds of evening commerce, ships calling to each other across the water like maritime conversations. Finally, Tula stepped closer, eliminating the careful distance she'd maintained since David left. I need you to understand something. This isn't just about us anymore. Every choice we make affects Oliver. Every argument, every moment of happiness, every time we succeed or fail as a couple. He'll be watching, learning what love looks like. I know. And I want him to learn that love means showing up even when it's hard, that it means choosing each other every day, not just when everything is perfect. Caspian reached up to wipe away her tears with his thumb. I want him to see his parents fighting for something worth having. Then fight for us, she whispered. Fight for this family because I'm tired of being brave alone. I'm tired of pretending I don't still love you with every broken, stubborn piece of my heart. The words unlocked something in Caspian's chest that had been locked away since the night she'd walked out of his life. He cubed her face in his hands, memorizing the feel of her skin, the gold flecks in her amber eyes, the way she leaned into his touch despite everything that had gone wrong between them. I love you, he said, the words carrying the weight of 14 months of regret and 6 months of missed moments with their son. I love you, and I love Oliver, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that some second chances are worth everything. When he kissed her, it tasted like forgiveness and new beginnings, and the kind of hope that only comes from choosing love despite all the reasons not to. Oliver babbled happily between them, as if he approved of his parents finally figuring out what he'd known all along, that they belonged together, that they were stronger as a family than they'd ever been apart. And for the first time in over a year, Caspian Drew felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 8 months later, the Denver office of Drew Maritime felt different on a Tuesday morning in March. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a spacious corner office where shipping manifests shared desk space with colorful building blocks and a framed photo of a toddler with serious gray eyes and an infectious grin. Tula Crane Drew. The name still felt new on her lips even 3 months after the quiet courthouse wedding. Looked up from her quarterly reports as familiar footsteps approached her door. After 8 months of Caspian splitting his time between Charleston and Denver, she'd learned to recognize his walk even from down the hall. Someone's here to see the boss lady, he announced, stepping into her office with Oliver perched on his shoulders, both of them grinning like they'd just pulled off the world's greatest conspiracy. At 14 months old, Oliver had developed into a miniature force of nature. He could walk with the determined wobble of someone who'd recently discovered mobility, say, mama, dada, and no, with impressive conviction, and had inherited both parents' stubborn streak in full measure. Let me guess, Tula said, standing to greet her boys. Someone refused to take his morning nap and talked Daddy into an impromptu office visit. In my defense, he made very compelling arguments, Caspian replied, lifting Oliver down into his arms. Something about missing mama and needing urgent cuddles. Oliver immediately reached for Tula, babbling excitedly as he transferred into her arms. The transition was seamless now. None of the careful hesitation that had marked their early days as a reunited family. They'd learned to move as a unit, to anticipate each other's needs, to share the daily rhythm of parenthood, with the kind of partnership Tula had always dreamed of, but never quite believed possible. And how did the morning meeting go? She asked, settling into her chair with Oliver on her lap, while Caspian claimed the seat across from her desk. The same arrangement they'd fallen into when he'd moved Drew Maritime's Western operations to Denver 6 months ago. Peterson Industries accepted our proposal. Full container shipping contract, 18 months renewable. Caspian's smile held quiet satisfaction. We're officially the primary freight partner for their Pacific routes. That's wonderful. That contract will create at least 20 new jobs here. 23. Actually, I already talked to HR about posting the positions. He leaned back in his chair, watching Oliver attempt to reorganize Tula's paperwork with typical toddler efficiency. There's something else though, something I wanted to discuss with you. The slight formality in his tone made her look up from Oliver's enthusiastic filing system. What kind of something? Morrison Maritime is for sale. The whole company, ships, routes, facilities, everything. Their board reached out yesterday. Tula knew the name. Morrison was one of their biggest competitors with prime shipping lanes throughout the Caribbean and South America. Acquiring them would essentially double Drew Maritime's reach overnight. That's a huge opportunity, she said carefully, but it would mean massive expansion, new territories, probably months of travel to oversee integration. A year ago, I would have jumped at it without thinking twice. Caspian reached over to steady Oliver, who was attempting to climb from Tula's lap to the desk. Now I keep thinking about what we'd have to sacrifice to make it work. What I'd miss while I was managing acquisitions in Sao Paulo or Buenos Aires. What are you saying? I'm saying I turned them down. Tallulah stared at him in shock. You turned down Morrison, Maritime Caspian. That company is worth less than what I have right here. He gestured around the office at Oliver's toys scattered on the credenza at the family photos that had gradually replaced maritime awards on the walls. We built something good here, Tula. Better than good. I'm not risking it for bigger numbers on a balance sheet. The certainty in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. 8 months ago, she would never have believed that Caspian Drew could walk away from an acquisition opportunity without looking back. But the man sitting across from her had kept every promise he'd made that night in Charleston, showing up for doctor appointments, learning Oliver's bedtime routine, building a life that prioritized presence over profit. Your board is going to think you've lost your mind, she said. My board will adjust, and if they don't, they can find a new CEO. He moved around the desk to where Oliver was now attempting to eat a shipping schedule, gently redirecting their son toward a more appropriate toy. I know what matters now. Finally figured out the difference between building an empire and building a life. Oliver clapped his hands as if applauding this wisdom, then launched into a stream of babbled commentary that included what sounded like Dada silly and Mama pretty. He's not wrong on either count, Caspian said, dropping a kiss on Tula's forehead. How did we get so lucky with this kid? Good genes, constant supervision, and mild bribery with Cheerios. She leaned into his touch, marveling at how natural this felt. The three of them in her office, planning a future that included board meetings and bedtime stories, shipping contracts and soccer practices. It hadn't been easy. There had been sleepless nights when Oliver was teething, arguments about whose turn it was to handle the midnight feedings, moments when the ghost of their past mistakes threatened to derail their carefully rebuilt trust. But they'd learned to fight for their relationship instead of with each other, to communicate through exhaustion and frustration, to remember that they were on the same team even when they disagreed about tactics. There's something I want to ask you, Caspian said, his voice taking on the slightly nervous tone that meant he was about to venture into emotional territory that still felt new to him. Ask away. David called yesterday. He's engaged to someone from his hometown, a teacher. Apparently, he wanted us to know so there wouldn't be any awkwardness if you ran into them around town. Tallulah felt a warm rush of genuine happiness for the man who'd loved them both enough to let them go. That's wonderful. I hope she appreciates what an incredible man she's getting. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd chosen him instead? The question might have been loaded with insecurity once, but Caspian's tone held only curiosity. They'd moved past the need to compete with David's memory, past the fear that their happiness was somehow borrowed or conditional. No, Tula said simply, I chose you. I choose you every day, even when you leave your coffee cups all over the house and teach Oliver words he shouldn't know yet. In my defense, damn is a perfectly legitimate response when you drop something heavy on your foot. He's 14 months old. Caspian. His vocabulary shouldn't include maritime curses. Oliver chose that moment to drop his toy truck with impressive force, looked down at the fallen object and declared with perfect clarity, "Uh-oh, damn." Caspian had the grace to look sheepish while Tula tried not to laugh. I'll work on that. We'll work on it, she corrected. Together, like everything else. The word together still had the power to make Caspian's chest tighten with gratitude. Together meant shared midnight feedings and joint decisions about daycare. Together meant compromise and communication, and the daily choice to prioritize their family over individual ambitions. Together meant that neither of them had to carry the weight of parenthood alone. I love you, he said, the words carrying 8 months of growing certainty, countless small moments of choosing each other, the accumulated weight of showing up every day, even when it wasn't easy. I love you, too, Tula replied, pulling him down for a kiss while Oliver babbled his approval from her lap. Outside the window, Denver stretched toward the mountains under a cloudless sky full of possibilities and new beginnings. They'd built something beautiful from the pieces of what they'd broken, something stronger for having survived the breaking. And in her heart, Tula knew that some love stories aren't about perfect timing or flawless execution. Sometimes they're about second chances and stubborn hearts, and to people brave enough to believe that the best things in life are worth fighting for, even when, especially when the outcome isn't guaranteed. Would you choose love over security? Would you fight for a second chance when the stakes included not just your heart, but your child's future. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.